Hey everyone, Norm from Tested here, and as promised, I'm doing a follow-up video to my favorite things of this past year. As is my personal tradition, I like to share with you some of my favorite coffee table, graphic novel books that I've collected and assembled this past year. Some of these were printed and released this year, some late last year. Some were actually pretty old with new printings and new editions. I think it's worthwhile and relevant to today. Something absolutely relevant and top of mind in the Tested world and in my mind is Dune. Yes, Denis Villeneuve's Dune. You know we love Dune here. Adam has been gushing about it. He's working on his prop replicas. I've been fascinated about the making of the film, and I've been so excited about this book. This is The Art and Soul of Dune, the official making of, as well as the concept art. It's written by one of the executive producers, Tanya Lapointe. And now I won't go through all the pages. I'll tell you, this is not your traditional movie behind the scenes book, because the author here was involved from the very beginning, right? As an executive producer, from when they first secured the rights with Legendary, the studio or the production company behind it, how they got Denis Villeneuve involved, to the earliest ideations of this iteration of Dune, because of course there's the David Lynch Dune from the 80s, as well as the Hordowski's Dune project. It's a storied piece of literature and its relationship with Hollywood and the way it's been represented in cinema, culminating of course with Dune Part 1 that we have released. One of my favorite things in here so far, though, is some of the behind the scenes of scenes that didn't make it, some deleted scenes. Actually, a fun thing is the cover of this is from a deleted scene. So they actually filmed a whole opening that they never ended up using of Jason Momoa, Duncan Idaho's character, doing a skydive or from a spaceship, like landing onto Arrakis as the opening of the film to show off the whole planet, and they built a whole spacesuit for him that we never got to see. And there are some photos of them filming that in here. Another really great deleted scene is when House Atreides first arrives on Arrakis, and they're left with the equipment, the mining equipment, as well as a mysterious box by Baron Harkonnen. And this box is shown here. It's a prop that Doug Harlarker made of this like chest, this ornate thing, just as ornate as the Gom Jabbar box or the needle that's used. They have a great reference for those in here as well. But when they opened the box, it was actually filled with thousands of cut off fingers of the spice miners as a way to sabotage the Atreides family as they got to the planet. So you get glimpses of that, you get glimpses into all the major set pieces from the design of the Bene Gesserit ships and the big attack on the world. I'm not gonna, it's a well-known book, but every major character and scene gets a spotlight here. From the Ornithopters, they made 4 full-size ones that they actually shipped over, and you get a sense of the scale of that production. And I think as this book was written, they were unsure that they would get a sequel. Obviously, the movie was pushed back because of the lockdown, but it doesn't end with see you in part 2, which I think is a fun kind of artifact of the production process, that these behind the scenes books have to get written and printed and published, and they weren't at that point greenlit for a sequel. So something to tide you over until the end of, I guess, what is it, 2023, 2 years from now, when we're gonna get Dune Part 2. Now, something not directly related, but I would say spiritually related. Every year, I like to feature one of the graphic artists I follow. These are poster artists that may have worked for companies like Mondo or Bottleneck Gallery. And this one is Killian Eng. These artists release their own kind of compilations of their personal artwork. And this specifically is none of the licensed stuff. So Killian Eng has been a longtime Mondo artist. He's a Swedish graphic designer and illustrator. And this book, Object Compendium, which he released, is basically a lot of his personal works. And from his earliest days, it's all digital art. You see a lot of his early work is very inspired by Moebius in terms of the line work. There's a lot of sense of huge sense of scale that you get with the Mobius thin figures, fine line work in these kind of dreamscapes, very surrealist, I think. And his works for Mondo, his posters for Ghost in the Shell, for Dune, he did one for Horodowski's Dune, as well as one of my favorites, he did a Black Hole, Disney's The Black Hole. All of his posters look like entrances, like gateways. They're framed by the 24 by 36 frame into these otherworldly places. He did one for Heavy Metal as well, which I love and have a print of. And you see his evolution of his style into the more surrealistic and into the very fine line work that he does. And again, none of this is like licensed from a movie or from a TV show. This is just from his own mind, and kind of like one of the artists that I follow who are, they're kind of acolytes and successors to the style of a Mobius working in the modern day, and always happy to support them by picking up their books as well. I'm going to move on from movie making books into Disney, Disneyana, the whole Disney ecosystem. I'm a big Disney fan, love going to Disneyland, Disney World. Haven't been these past 2 years, but these two books have helped tide me over during that time. This was released this year. This is The Art of Galaxy's Edge. Now, it's in the very same format as the other Art of Star Wars books, from The Mandalorian to the prequel trilogy. Even Solo had one, so it fits right alongside there. But this one is about, well, the Batuu, the park that they built in Disneyland and Walt Disney World, Hollywood Studios, that has the attractions, the rides, and the type of world building they have to do is very different for a park. I mean, they're doing storytelling, but storytelling as opposed to through a cinema lens, the frame of, you know, the J.J. Abrams movie or a TV show, Jon Favreau TV show, the lens of the visitor's experience. What happens when you walk through, you know, into Batuu, and from the signs, the characters, the cast members' costumes, to the restaurants, all the theming that happens in the Disney Disneyland kind of ecosystem has to be conceived out with some of the same artists, Doug Chiang, and some of the same people who work on the films at Lucasfilm, and you get so much of that that's then represented here. Again, a lot of this stuff is just explorations as they are figuring out kind of the architecture and geometry of Batuu, of how do you hide. One of the things they do great is how do you hide the outside world, even hide the other parts of the park when you're inside and enclosed in the space. And so you have these wonderful, wonderful pieces of concept art, things from the rides as well, Rise of the Resistance, Smuggler's Run. So if you're a fan of Disneyland, Disney World, and maybe you haven't had a chance to get to Galaxy's Edge, this will give you a great preview. And if you have, I love just being able to see the parts that I never noticed, from, you know, like the signage to the calligraphy, the tapestries on the gift shop walls, and they, of course, they do the classic thing of promoting an upcoming experience, the Halcyon, the hotel, the Star Wars themed hotel that they're launching at Walt Disney World. There's some concept art for that as well. That's The Art of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Now, The Art of Mandalorian Season 2 is something I had highly anticipated on my wish list. It was supposed to be released this month in December, but got pushed out to February. So unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to check that out or include it on this list, but I'll include a link below if you want to pre-order that as well. My other Disney themed book, this one I actually had to dig for. This is actually just about the Disneyland Hotel. Now, if you have Disney Plus, the subscription service, the streaming service, one of their documentary series I highly recommend is called Behind the Attraction. It actually is directed by the same and written by the same guy who does Behind the Movies That Made Us and the Toys That Made Us on Netflix. So very similar style. And the series on Disney Plus kind of, each episode dives into one famous Disneyland attraction and the story of how that ride came to be, from Haunted Mansion to Small World. And one of the episodes doesn't feature an attraction. It actually features Disneyland Hotel. And it's a fascinating story how in the 50s, this hotel, which was one of the first ones that opened in the famous orange grove of Anaheim, where Disneyland was built, was not funded and created and owned by the Disney company, that Walt Disney had to try to find entrepreneurs and hotel magnates to partner with them to open up a Disneyland hotel. And so this is about the era of 1954 to 1988, the early years where the Disneyland Hotel was built as one of the first all-encompassing hotel resorts in the world. It had its own like lake in the middle with boat rides. It had lounges, a convention center, the things we kind of take for granted when we go to a hotel these days for an event, even in and around Disneyland. But the Disneyland Hotel was the first to do that. And it had evolved over the years, new buildings being built up. The monorail system was a big part, a big appeal of staying at that hotel, because you get direct access to Disneyland, and the lounges, the restaurants that the monorail stopped at. These are things that no longer exist. The hotel has since, after Disney company actually finally acquired it in 1988, it's been torn down and rebuilt, and now it just feels like a Disneyland resort. But the whole history of that hotel, which I was first introduced to in that Behind the Attraction documentary, is further explored in this second printing of this book. And it's just a wonderful piece for people who are interested in Disneyland and the whole Disney ecosystem. Moving on to some comics. Two they're not new, but one is a new book. You'll soon understand what I mean. The first one is a graphic novel, and this one is actually, it's been out there for a long time. This is Invincible by Robert Kirkman and Cory Walker, the artist who was later replaced by Ryan Ottley. But if you have Amazon Prime, one of my favorite animated shows of this past year is Invincible, which is, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but if you're unfamiliar, if you're familiar, if you're a fan of the comic, which I have been, I've read this for over 15 years now. It fulfilled everything I wanted out of the Invincible comic in animated form, and I'm glad it was an animated show, not a live-action show. I don't think they could have done fulfilled the ambition of and the scope of and the kind of, to be honest, the brutality of the comic that's shown here in a live action form. It's not quite like The Boys, but it is a rift and a different take on the superhero genre, while also kind of paying homage to a lot of the classic superhero archetypes, from the Justice League to the X-Men to with different names, of course, in this Robert Kirkman universe. But the first season, which basically on Amazon encompasses the first 13 issues of the series is wrapped up now, is packed into this Ultimate Collection. This is the first of 12 volumes. I picked this up back in 2008, I believe, and was first printed. I mean, the series started in 2003. But if you enjoyed the show, or if you're curious about Invincible, the TV show, I would highly encourage you to pick this up. It's been in print for over a decade now, and so a wonderful companion to a really, really great superhero animated show. Now we'll go even further back in time to the origins of the first family of Marvel, Fantastic Four. We're all highly anticipating the arrival of the Fantastic Four in the MCU at some point in the future. Director John Watts has been tapped to direct that after doing Spider-Man No Way Home. But Fantastic Four, I've actually never read Fantastic Four #1. We've all seen that classic comic book cover of the Fantastic Four with the Mole Man monster climbing out. And if you have like a Marvel Unlimited subscription, you can find a copy digitally of it. But it's always interesting, reprints or recreations of classic vintage comics done full size to the page don't do the experience justice. If you've ever held like an old 60s or 70s or 80s comic, the cheap pulpy newsprint paper, the separation in colors in the CMYK printing, that's all part of a comic book experience that we frankly don't get a lot of today, even in the glossy comics that you pick up off of your local comic book store. And so this book, called Fantastic Four #1, panel by panel, is like, I would consider this like the Criterion edition of Fantastic Four #1. Over 200 pages focused just on that book, that one 25-page issue. What happened is this graphic artist, Chip Kidd, along with his collaborators, found a collector with not a mint condition, let's be honest, with a physical copy of the original Fantastic Four 1, and they photographed it and scanned it in high resolution advertisements, Charles Atlas ads, and all, and reprint it here panel by panel. And so every page here is actually one blown up panel of that book zoomed in. So you do get to see like the texture of the page, the separation of the colors, the inking and the type of all of this. And you can read this, you know, it takes almost like 100 pages or so to get through that, but it really feels like you have a magnifying glass to this piece of comic book history, and you can actually get an approximation of what it would feel like to have that comic book in front of you. And then after you finish that, they actually have an annotated page-by-page breakdown of Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's creation. So their collaboration, one of the executive editors at Marvel goes through and talks about how Stan Lee and Jack Kirby collaborated on these, what may have been panel revisions. And then at the end, if you want, and it's an interesting decision, but at the end, they actually have the full scans printed, so in full page, so you can read it in that 25-page format if you want to flip it. But actually, I like that they put this toward the end of the book, because in my head, as I was going through, I'm like, wait, why don't just have the pages full blown so I can read it like a comic book? And then I realized as I was going through it at the end, that this is still insufficient, that printing a scan of this decades-old comic at full size on a page here, I don't get the texture of the original pulp, of the original, and that's why by blowing it up, by feeling like you have that magnifying glass look, that feels like a thorough breakdown and appreciation of one of the most important comic books in the Golden Age era. Finally, I'm gonna wrap up with something a little bit fun, a little bit offbeat, but also tying to a video we did, back in 2019. We interviewed artist Matthew Reinhart, who's based in the Bay Area, and he is one of the foremost, most talented, and most accomplished pop-up book engineers, designers in the world right now. He's worked on the Harry Potter pop-up book. There was a Star Wars one that we profiled the creation of. I'll link to that video below. And this one just released this year is in the world of Jurassic Park. They call it Jurassic World. In my heart, it's still Jurassic Park. Then we think of the design of a pop-up book. There are only 5 spreads in this. You only open 5 centerpiece folds, but every one is a diorama. And I'll show you 2 of them that blow my mind. I don't want to give away all this, but you imagine opening this and you see this is from the original Jurassic Park. It is the Visitor Center. Now, not only did this pop up and you have that engineering of the pop-up and also the great art as well of not only the front, but the back of these pieces have printing on them. So you get a full kind of 360 representation of the visitor center. But then when I pull this, it actually animates into that T-Rex scene at the end with the banner falling down and the raptors jumping on it. That is just so fun. You also have the classic kitchen scene, if I can pull that, with some animation as well. And that engineering, it's essentially paper crafting if you think about it. To put that in a book, it's not a templated thing, right? And with every single one of these books, Matt Reinhart has to come up with the scene, come up with the animations. It's not just all dioramas. This scene I love because it folds up and then it encourages you to lay the book flat, and you have the scene of these 2 dinosaurs, and when you pull these tabs, you have a little bit of a Rock'em Sock'em dino, as well as, of course, some additional information in fold-out tabs and scenes. So you have 5 of these spreads, and I gotta be careful about the way I fold them in together and overlap them a certain way. You know, I think they call this like an all-ages book, but I wouldn't necessarily give it to like a 3-year-old or 4-year-old who might tear that apart. But for the 30-year-old in your life who loves Jurassic Park or Jurassic World, this is just a really, really fun book that you can interact with. So there you have it, some of my favorite coffee table graphic novel books of the year. I'll have links to everything I mentioned in the description below. Let me know what your favorite books were of this past year, coffee table graphic novel or otherwise, or things you're looking forward to. Have a wonderful holiday break. We have a lot more videos this rest of the year, but we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.